Absolutely.
I had a customer, 3 brothers, and I was like, what were brothers? Oh,
Yeah.
that's right.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
It's not even that good of a story. I interrupted, so really. All right. I had a customer, 3 brothers, sitting in the office with one. The other brother pops his head in the room and said, "Oh, all of a sudden you're calling me Gregory." He's like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Oh, I'm getting ready to send this wire out that you told me to send out." And he said, I didn't tell you to send a wire, but it looks so legitimate besides the Gregory. And that didn't even really trip him up. He thought his brother was trying to be funny. So it's so common, and you run into it all the time too, I know.
Yeah, my stance on those emails is anybody who gets one of those can send it to me and we can look at it and tell you. And every once in a while, I get an email that I have to take a couple minutes to look at and figure out, do I think it's real or not? So even somebody who looks at these every day, I still have to sometimes pay attention to them. Usually they're pretty easy to figure out, but it's not always. But cyber liability insurance, you should have that. And that's actually one of the things that we can help with. If anybody here has ever filled out one of those forms, they're horrible. There's a lot of questions. You will not be able to answer most of them honestly. If you answer them incorrectly and then you do use your policy, they will actually try and figure out if you answered things incorrectly and deny you insurance. So we actually help. We have a 3-page single-spaced document that we can go through that covers most of the insurance questions, and then also give you pointers. Here's what we need to change and here's why, because you may not be insurable.
And just to follow up too, like on social engineering, and that, we are seeing so much of that where, exactly that. It's a request from somebody to send payment somewhere that it shouldn't go. People are stealing emails, they're stealing, they're convincing, just even over the phone, convincing people to share account passwords, account numbers. And there are very different policies from a cyber insurance and that cyber liability. And we need Pat here, really, Pat O'Neill, to really probably get more into the weeds on that. But it's very clear all policies are not created equal, and we really can't stress enough to make sure you cover the bases on that, because there is a tremendous risk. And I know the statistics for us that if a small business is hit with fraud, it's like a 60% chance that that business is going out of business and can't financially recover. So important stuff.
And one of the things we do say is, kind of with the example with Greg or Gregory, if you get an email asking for money, asking to do anything, reach out to them, but reach out to them in a different method of conversation. So if you get an email, call them and ask. I'm starting to get emails from our customers saying they want to do ACH, sending us our invoices, and then I make sure we actually have a conversation about that. After I send the stuff back, I say, call me to verify this, and then we can verify over the phone and make sure that the whole chain is correct. So it's not just, they asked for it, let's blindly listen. Reach out in another manner to ask if that's the right thing.
So Brian, I have a client that kind of went through just what you explained. They didn't know it, but they had been hacked 20 months before they knew they were. And what the hackers did was they watched their system and understood in November, the vendor writes the most checks to this company, our client, and they emailed the accounts receivable clerk and said, they emailed the vendor and said, our accounts changed. And so the vendor sent $1.4 million to a bank in Denver, and then the Secret Service got involved because it was such a large amount. Found out they had been hacked years before, many months before, and that money was in the Denver bank account for like 10 minutes, and then it was shipped overseas.
It's gone before you know it's even there.
It's gone.
Was it gone?
It was gone,
Yes.
gone. And their insurance, they had insurance, they thought it would be covered, and the insurance company found every reason why not to pay the benefit. So my question is, do you guys do stress tests of IT services? So like if you go into a client, can you tell them, here, you're at risk and that type of thing?
We can tell them they're at risk. There's no guarantees that we'll be able to give the exact perfect, you do this and this will never happen. But we can go in, that's one of the things we do with that audit. We can go in and actually say, here's all the things that the insurance companies are looking for, and they're looking for this because they don't want to pay you. So if they're saying you should do it, it's because it costs money. We can go through and make sure they're doing the right things. Okay. You want this back to be big again?
Yeah, I have a question. Ransomware and the dark web. I got an email saying my email was on the dark web. And ever since then, I've been getting all kinds of pretty good solicitations for, my checking account number or credit card, and they look pretty convincing. Is there a way to get my email out of the dark web? And the second question is, what do you do about ransomware? You just have to pay it, or is there some other way to, I guess, of course you should try to prevent ransomware by doing.
Yeah, so the first part with your email being on the dark web, I like to joke, okay, so who here has an email address? Your email's on the dark web. There's a very good chance that one of your old passwords is also on the dark web. Insurance companies like to send out this little form saying, hey, look, we found all these email addresses on the dark web. I don't do that because I can tell you the answer before you even run it. It's out there. There's nothing you can do about it. There's a good chance there's other identifying information that went out with it. With one of the breaches of big places, Target's been breached, Home Depot's been breached, large organizations. So there's nothing you can do about it. The laws in the country aren't strong enough to push the large people to actually do anything. There's nothing we can do. So just be wise, pay attention to what you're doing. On ransomware, the best thing you can do is you can have really, really good antivirus, which is not just Symantec or Norton or anything like that. There's a next generation antivirus that kind of watches what's happening, not just paying attention to what exists, but what shouldn't be happening, and watches for that, so it can actually try and stop it right at the beginning. But there's a whole bunch of them. So we use Bitdefender, there's Sentinel one. Problem is most of them don't really sell single licenses to people that just want to buy it, but there's a bunch of them out there. If you really want to look, we can have a conversation about that and see if there's something you can use. But the target is you do your best ability to never pay a ransom, because if you do, that's just fueling the system. And usually they will give you the keys to your data back if you give them the money, but there's no guarantee. And slowly but surely, the pendulum is swinging to, they just want the money, they're going to ignore you after that. Won't even get you access to anything that you lost. So good backups.
Brian, Dave, yeah, question myself and then Dave Jacinto. I think we got plenty of time still. This is great. With the rise of just the artificial intelligence, not even the rise of it, but just how quickly that is evolving, becoming more sophisticated, and then of course the deep fakes, which have been around for years, but concerns around that becoming increasingly heightened. I know legislation and protection is woefully behind where the technology is at, but do you have any tips or recommendations? I know cybersecurity is not your primary focus, like you said, but just to protect yourself, or what kind of protocols can be put in place if it's voice technology that's impersonating someone, or if it's gosh, you're on a Zoom meeting and someone's being impersonated. Hopefully you'll be able to pick up on the personality being different, but I know this is becoming increasingly sophisticated. So do you just have any general recommendations?
There's not much you can do other than if you pick up the phone, you hear static, don't say yes, because they can say that recorded yes was when you said yes to whatever their contractual agreement was for businesses. But sadly, it's kind of like, do you have an email address that's on the dark web? Do you have information? It can be taken and done whatever it wanted if it's public information.
Dave and then Jacinto, yeah. Yes. Oh, I did. Okay. All right. We're probably getting the same type of training and all that, right?
So as you learn, there's certain things that you just kind of have to grin and bear. There's not much that can be done about it.
You mentioned hardware.
Yes.
To back up. I know someone personally, I just saw something on a community page about people complaining that their hard drives or their backup drives or thumb drives, that they were essentially unopenable. Does that happen over time? Or is it a matter of restoring?
A thumb drive or USB key has a finite amount of data you can actually write to it, and over time that's going to shrink. And then there's one point, if that's your only backup source, then probably over time it's going to die. If you're using a hard drive and it's a spinning hard drive, it has a certain amount of hours that's going to be on before it just dies. You do not know what that is until it happens. It could be a week, it could be 20 years. So if you're doing backups, you're doing it with physical media, make sure to have 2 or 3 of them that you cycle through. So at worst case, you lose a week's worth of data or 2 weeks worth of data. You don't lose everything. So yeah, but it's better to do something that's completely off. Maybe it's a really secure online backup that they manage it for you. So it's worth paying a little bit of money to have somebody else manage it for you, because then it's probably running much better than what you can handle.
So you're talking a lot about computers, but how safe are our phones, and what type of things do you have suggestions for to keep those secure?
They're safer. The key is don't just go around randomly installing applications. Make sure that if you're installing something, it's got really good reviews, and there's a lot of reviews to it. The phones were designed very differently. With Windows, you can install anything you want, however you want. With an iPhone, you cannot. It takes a lot of effort to install it on an iPhone. On Android, you can actually disable that, so you can install other things. So it can be less secure, but out of everybody in this room, I bet you there's only 2 or 3 people who may build install apps on an Android that aren't sanctioned. So phones in general are pretty secure because of the fact that they were designed that way. Computers were designed how many decades ago? Smartphones aren't that old, so this stuff was already happening by the time those started to exist.
So if I can ask one more question. This is just hearsay, but antiviruses for programs for computers, I had someone tell me one time that those are sometimes the programs that hackers try and hack into to get into your systems. Is that any truth to that, or is that something you should be concerned about? Or
I don't know if you should be all too concerned about it, because anything is an opportunity to be hacked, but the likelihood is pretty low. The question is, do you have the right antivirus to do what you actually need it to do? So just picking a random antivirus, if you're going to pick a random antivirus, actually just use the one in Windows. That's probably going to do the same equivalent as just a random standard antivirus. And on a Mac, yes, you should have antivirus as well, because that's a little different. It's harder to have something happen on a Mac, but when it does, it usually takes Apple a month, 2 months before they even acknowledge it. And the acknowledgement is, so, oh, we realize this is happening, here's a fix today. But between then, there's dead silence. So having something else that can actually prevent it is important.
So yesterday, I get a phone call, and they're saying that they're Microsoft calling me. And as they proceeded to talk with me, I said, well, I don't have that. And they started yelling at me, so I obviously knew it wasn't Microsoft.
Did they speak English?
Not very well.
Okay, that's your first sign.
That was my first clue. So I did hang up, got the phone number they were calling from, and I went online and reported it in Microsoft's portal. What else can we do? How are they getting our numbers? And, you know, knowing that we have Microsoft. I mean, I have.
Well, they don't know you have Microsoft. They have a number and maybe a name.
Right.
That's it.
I even said, I don't have Microsoft, and they started like screaming at me.
It's literally, it's a term in technology that's called phishing. They're just out there phishing. Yeah, absolutely. But if you're getting a call from any large corporation and they don't speak American English like they've lived here all their life, it's probably not accurate. If you get the pop-ups on your screen saying call this number and you get those same people, probably not accurate. Don't give any of them money. Don't give them any of them important information. And usually when I get a call from Microsoft and it's valid, it's usually from Washington State. So.
Hey, Brian, this is something that I know I struggle with, and maybe somebody else does too. How do you recommend you manage personal passwords? You know, I know you're not supposed to use the same password for multiple things, but I can't remember. Well, I can't remember one password, let alone 10, 20, 50. So how do you manage that, and how do you store them to keep it secure?
So my mom has a little book that says passwords on it. I'm okay with the book. I'd probably not like to see passwords written on the front of it, like actually stamped into it from the manufacturer. But you need to have something, because if you're supposed to have a different password everywhere and you don't have that documented somewhere, you're going to use the same password everywhere. So have something. It can be a password manager. Make sure that if you use a password manager, I don't necessarily have any good recommendations because a lot of the big ones have had hacks. So that brings it to, is it better to have a paper documentation somewhere and keep it really, really secure?
So if you're one, you're asking for trouble. I mean, how many passwords should you have ideally?
How many accounts do you have? So
I mean,
let's say you
you're
have.
talking about, you have an account for your cell phone, you got a bank account, you got an account for your gas bill. You could have hundreds of accounts.
So you should have hundreds of passwords,
Holy cow.
which is why I say don't try to remember them all, because then they're gonna be too uniform.
Ryan, do you have any thoughts on, is Keeper one of the password managers, to your knowledge, that was, a risk or?
I'd have to look, if you put whatever you're using and then hack in Google, very quickly you're gonna figure out if it's been hacked or not.
Yeah.
I think OnePass and LastPass have been really big ones. I think both of them have had problems.
Brian, is it good to let your phone or your computer remember your passwords?
So it makes it much easier if you're using, it depends on the browser you're using, like Chrome and Firefox technically store those passwords in plain text. So if I get your computer, I can get your password.
Brian, what keeps you up at night that we wouldn't even, I'm serious, that we wouldn't even think to be worried about? Because obviously I know several of us in this room do get trainings, whether we're independent business owners or part of a corporation. Sometimes you do get test phishing emails to check your preparedness and are you looking for things, but what don't we lay people think about that you think about that, maybe we don't want to know, but that is something we should concern ourselves with?
I try not to do that in general because there's too many things to think about. I recognize that regardless of what happens today, tomorrow is still going to happen.
Yeah.
So I try not to worry.
Just be prepared.
Yeah.
Okay. Good answer. Anyone else? All right, Brian, thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Go ahead and do the lotto, yeah.
949. So 9949.
949. All right, the treasurer. All right. David, I told you you'd sell a winning ticket today. I knew it. I just knew it.
Okay, please remember our speaker next week is Summit County Executive Eileen Shapiro, so please come and listen to her and support her. And if there's nothing further, have a great afternoon. Thanks, everybody.